Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee. We continue our inquiry today on the subject of biosecurity at the border. We are delighted to have with us the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State from DEFRA. Minister, you're very welcome. It's your first appearance with this committee, so we hope it will be the first of many and we can have a good and profitable working relationship. Just for the benefit of those who are following our proceedings and indeed for their official record, can I invite you to introduce yourself and your colleagues to your right?
Yes, so my name is Sue Hayman. I'm the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State, as you've just said, in DEFRA, and one of my portfolio responsibilities is biosecurity and border health, plant health, animal health and welfare, which I understand is what your committee is looking into. I have Gareth, Baynham-Hughes on my right, and further on my right, Spencer Draper, who both work in the department with me on these issues.
Okay, good afternoon, and you are all very welcome to the committee. Minister, the Prime Minister says food security is national security.
Yes.
So biosecurity at the border, therefore, attaches a particular importance. And you've possibly got one of the most important jobs in government, therefore, outside the Cabinet. How confident are you in the robustness of the protections that we have at the border to protect the biosecurity of this country?
Well, the biosecurity measures we have in place, I believe, are robust. They have been improved since we came into government. We've made some changes to tighten up biosecurity, particularly around personal imports of certain products. Of course, nothing is ever 100% secure, but I see it I take it very seriously that my responsibility is to ensure that the checks and balances that we have in place are as robust as possible for biosecurity to protect the country while still facilitating trade, because it's getting that balance right that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. Now, I want to look at some of the evidence that we have heard in the committee, and we went with Gareth to Dover Port some time ago, are looking at the measures taken in relation to the foot and mouth outbreak that we had, first of all, in Germany and then later outbreaks in Hungary and Slovakia. Have you assessed the effectiveness of your response to these outbreaks?
Well, of course. I mean, whenever you have any kind of threat, you have to take the correct action at the time. You have to react as swiftly as possible, and we did react very swiftly for foot and mouth. For example, on the very day that Germany announced it had a case of foot and mouth, we contacted the port health authorities and told them that they were no longer to get the imports in from Germany that were affected by that disease outbreak, and we moved as quickly as possible to update the different digital systems that we use. But in that small gap, we ensured that there was proper information shared. Port health authorities talk to each other, as do border forces and so on, to make sure that we were doing our very best to stop any infected products coming in. Again, you have to then review what's happened. Are we happy? And go over it again. Because as far as I'm concerned, when you have any kind of risk, you have to then analyse it to see if you can make improvements. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I mean, look, we are mindful of the fact that this is a brand new system required to do something that has not been done. So an element of pressure testing, such as you would have had in January at the time of the food and blanket outbreak and the closure of imports from Germany, that's an opportunity to see where there are gaps in the pipes and you're getting some steam coming out. One of the concerns that we heard in evidence was surrounding the operation of IPAFs, the Import of Products, Animals, Food and Feed system. Mm-hmm. Now, You know that we heard evidence on that because we wrote to you about it not once but twice. We wrote to you on the 11th of February and then we wrote again following your reply on the 11th of March. It actually took 3 months to get your department to provide us with the number of German consignments that were able to bypass FMD controls between the 10th and the 16th of January. The 10th of January being the date of closing to products, the 16th of January being the date that you told us in your letter of the 21st of March was when IPAFS was updated. Why is it so difficult to get information out of the department? Did you not know that information, or did you know it and just not want to tell us?
I would say neither of those things. I would suggest that there have been some teething problems with correspondence in DEFRA that we are currently tackling.
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, correspondence has been taking longer to respond to than I have been comfortable with, and we are looking to speed things up.
Are you talking about the correspondence between yourself and the committee, or correspondence between DEFRA and the various stakeholders and operators?
No,
or?
Correspondence between myself and the committee.
Right, okay. So the fact that we asked a very direct question on the 11th of February and then had to ask it again on the 11th of March, that's an internal plumbing issue, are you saying?
Yes, and I apologise for that.
Okay, well, look, we all understand it. We're keen, actually, that where there is a pressure test on the system, we don't want to, be public executioners. We think there is a public interest in highlighting these issues. That's what we as a committee are here to do, but we do need transparency. So if that's a lesson learned, then we're happy to accept that, and I'm sure we can move on. The Chief Vet, though, also told us, because we had heard evidence about whey products being imported and being brought to the attention of Helen Buckingham, one of our witnesses, after the closure of the borders. The Chief Vet said that no one informed DEFRA of the cases of German whey, and that as a consequence they couldn't have done anything about it. But thinking about it, what does that tell us about the monitoring systems in place for prohibited products?
Well, that the report of German whey being imported was unverified, and I think, as my understanding is there was no evidence found that it had happened.
Well, the evidence we had came direct from the public health consultant who gave evidence to us, saying that she had taken a call from people in Birmingham. Now, there was no evidence given directly to DEFRA, but that surely was evidence.
Well, as I say, we weren't contacted about it. I would ask anyone who knows of such products coming through to contact DEFRA as a matter of urgency, because clearly we rely very much on working constructively with other organisations.
We did get correspondence from the Chief Veterinary Officer. I don't know if you've had sight of it or not, dated the 2nd of May, clarifying a lot of these matters. We presume, we don't know for certain obviously, but we presume that the information in the Chief Veterinary Officer's correspondence came from an email that was circulated on the 25th of April in relation to foot and mouth disease, urgent request for information. Urgent presumably because they knew you and your colleagues were coming to the committee, rather than it was urgent in relation to the actual closure of the borders on the 10th of January. Again, does this, let me ask you bluntly, the information gathering that you undertook on the 25th of April there, which was good and sensible stuff to do, would that actually have happened, do you think, if the Select Committee had not been running the rule over the work of DEFRA on this?
I can't necessarily answer that. The CVO has been doing work on the response. We've been looking at how we can improve the response. I don't know the timelines that she was working to. It may be that she changed her focus slightly to answer the questions being asked the Select Committee. It may have been that that's what she would have worked on anyway, because we're looking at the whole response in the round and seeing how we can ensure that any further threats are going to be dealt with appropriately and swiftly.
Okay. So look, we're all on a learning curve here. Perhaps another
yes, but
point to take away from
having said that, the response to foot and mouth, and then in Germany, and then to Hungary and Slovakia, was handled very professionally and effectively by the Chief Veterinary Officer, who called us all together very, very swiftly to inform us what the situation was. And then following the initial German outbreak, has been looking very, very carefully to ensure that the system is as robust as it possibly can be, following that experience and understanding how the response worked.
Mm-hmm. Minister, might I add? Would that be okay, Chairman?
Yeah.
So I think it's worth bearing in mind as well, these are systems that are new for the EU but operated perfectly successfully and somewhat under the radar for the rest of the world trade before EU exit. But there are also systems that are regularly audited, for example. So whether it's the EU or other trading partners, they come over and assess our competent authority functions and how we exercise those. I think what you put your finger on is what levels of knowledge and data do we have at each level within the overall central competent authority, but successive audits where people come over and look at our systems find that local port health authorities as one layer of the competent authority, or local authorities on food safety, for example, another part of the competent authority, are functioning effectively and well, and that's the basis on which people are prepared to trade with us. I think we are learning that from the EU in particular, adding up the sort of some of the so what of the data, because the scale of that trade is so much greater, is something that is worth investing in. But I don't think any of the points raised really get to sort of undermine the success with which each layer of the competent authority system performs its functions.
Mm-hmm. Now, you lead me on very nicely, actually, then to some questions around contingency planning, because the actual pretty limited outbreak that you had in Germany cost the German economy, I'm told, €1 billion. That kind of shows the full extent of the risk that is posed to us here if we don't get this right. 2002, the National Audit Office reported on weaknesses in contingency planning and communication with stakeholders during the 2001 outbreak. It made various recommendations around contingency plannings to be tested on a regular basis. 2018, you had an FMD simulation exercise called Exercise Blackthorn. There were 55 recommendations to be actioned by the Department, APHA, UK policy teams, National Emergency Epidemiology Group and DAERA in Northern Ireland. In 2021, you did an African swine fever simulation called Exercise Holly. How have all the 55 recommendations from that 2018 foot and mouth simulation been fully implemented? Can you tell us?
Well, without having the list in front of me,
Gareth, you maybe
Gareth may well be able to help with
equally,
this.
I couldn't say what number out of 55, but I could say something about how we typically take forward those things. So there is a huge effort now, not least because of the change in the risk assessment level, the assessment of the risk of incursion of FMD following the events in Europe, to look again at the preparedness. But that all builds on existing structures. So we have an outbreak readiness board. We have a whole series of things that would typically take the lessons learned from that and put them into future planning. So we do have ongoing exercises. I never know what I'm allowed to say in public about them. There is certainly an exercise due at the end of the year. We're doing also exercising things like zoonotic diseases. Obviously, FMD isn't one of those. So there is a regular plan, and as part of that, we typically go back over previous lessons learned, but I can't tell you to what extent
you
the
perhaps
particular
follow that
recommendations
up
we met.
in correspondence. I mean, given that the events of January were a bit of a wake-up call for us, would it not be sensible to run the rule over what you've been told previously?
There is a large amount of new work that is happening following the outbreaks in Germany in early January, and that's overseen. I know you took evidence from Emily Miles, my my direct boss the other week, and that's all organised within the department, particularly between us and the Animal and Plant Health Agency, who are dusting off all of their plans, and we're reporting to our internal executive committee on that in May. So that work isn't all in hand, so we can absolutely follow up with more details about that preparedness work if helpful.
Okay, just to come back to Emily Mills's point, her evidence to the committee was that she had set up, and I quote, a relatively small project, end quote, to consider our preparedness for an FMD outbreak. How much resource is given to a relatively small project, and is that going to be sufficient?
You're okay for... I don't know the numbers of staff, but we have moved new people into that, and there are new people in the Animal and Plant Health Agency, and we can look at what documentation from that we can share that gives reassurance about the level of activity. The work is mapped out in 3 phases, so there's some early work we're doing, which is the sort of absolute priority, no regrets work. You'll see, for example, I think we're due to update the FMD control plan, and that will be published soon. Yeah. There's similarly work going on within the agency on things like procurement readiness, equipment readiness. So there's a handful of people drawing all of that work together, but they'll be pulling across all of the teams. And then specifically on things like what happens at the border, there are other bits of work going on. So, for example, having learnt that although it's not strictly necessary for immediate response at the border, that it is helpful to update IPAS quickly. We now have the list of changes you need to make for foot and mouth. So we've identified the top 5 disease risks, and we're doing readiness work so that we have upfront the list of commodities that could be affected by outbreaks of those diseases. So there's a whole series of activity, which currently we're doing from... it's essentially all through reprioritisation within my team and within the agency and so on.
Look, if you could share as much of that as you possibly can with us, because I think it's fair to say, without, if I'm mischaracterising this, my colleagues will correct me, but we've had a fairly consistent drumbeat of people giving evidence to the committee, complaining that the communication between themselves, and we're looking at trade bodies, suppliers, transporters, logistics organisations, all saying that they're not given sufficient certainty. So, quite apart from the curiosity of the committee, which you will know is almost limitless, there is a public interest here for rebuilding confidence in the system. You touched on it, Gareth. I didn't quite understand what you said. Are you planning to do any more foot and mouth disease simulations?
So we are planning to specifically walk the Secretary of State through a tabletop sort of scenario shortly. There is another exercise. I don't think it's FMD focused, so I honestly don't know the specific plan for FMD focused exercises. Typically what we try and do is identify the things we most want to exercise, and of course some of the benefits of exercising other diseases would pay off in terms of FMD preparedness. So we might need to come back to you with a sort of a programme of the planned exercises.
I mean, look, I'm focusing on FMD because it's particularly current. Yep. You've also got African swine fever, you've got blue tongue, you've got...
HPAI, sheep and goat pox,
even flu, you've got the one that I hadn't heard until recently, the goat plague. Yeah. So we have a series of different disease threats coming our way, and the only one of them needs to get through. If 2 of them get through, then my goodness, we could be in catastrophic territory. Helena, you wanted to touch again on Operation or Exercise Blackthorn.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Gareth, I think, as the person probably before us with the most institutional memory here, having been in post since July 2019, the year after Exercise Blackthorn was conducted, it just strikes me as a little unsettling that you can't give us an assurance as a committee that the serious recommendations from that since 2018 and 2019, when you joined the department, have not been exercised in that 7 years since.
We are extremely systematic about this work, but in the same period we have also had the largest outbreak of avian influenza. We had COVID affecting the team both in terms of our operations, of course, but also what we had to do out in the field and set up zoo rescue funds. We had to support Ukraine and people arriving with pets. So there's a huge amount of stuff that I've been focused on, and that means the system overall is under pressure. The model really has always been that the model is that you invest when things are calm, so that when things are less calm, you're ready, and then you move back. And the reality is we've been contending with successive outbreaks. I'm hoping it's purely coincidental that it's been since I've been in post, but we have since 2020 not left outbreak mode. And so that does mean that's been a particular focus, but there is a systematic element to our work behind the scenes, regular governance and so on, that looks at outbreak readiness assessments and all of that work. So we can provide a pattern of that information. The NAO are going to publish a report on this relatively soon, and I think they'll make a similar point essentially, which is that we're all doing the best we can in the situation we've got, but the situation does mean that we need to think about whether in the long term that approach overall is sustainable. But to the extent we can, we do all of this work as systematically as we can.
And on the theme of fixing the roof while the sun's shining, and horizon scanning, something I was very alarmed to hear as a South Coast Member of Parliament was about the risk of mosquito-borne diseases in future. Is that on your radar?
Yes,
is it something you're working on?
So we have, I would say, of all the things that we should be most confident about, we have really excellent world-leading surveillance of that sort of risk. And we have a particular thing called the Veterinary Risk Group. I get a report every month, but I mean, fundamentally they report to the Chief Veterinary Officer, that captures a whole range of risks from all sorts of sources, wildlife, vector-borne diseases, movements of animals through trade and so on. It captures all of this in one place and essentially asks the question, are we doing enough now to understand those forward risks and plan properly? I know our Permanent Secretary took part in a veterinary risk group meeting not so long ago and thought it was a really good example of that, still being able to do that systematic work, planning for the worst in advance while all of these outbreaks and so on are happening. And just even within sort of classical disease terms, I think there's something like, on average, over 1,000 reports to the World Animal Health Organization that our teams look at to understand what's being reported by internationally, what is the risk, what's the risk to the UK in particular, and do we need to take actions? I think it's something like 13,000 notifications that we look at on average per year through those sorts of systems as well. So all of that is going on while we're still dealing with the outbreaks that haven't ceased to plague us.
Okay, right, we're going to move on to the smuggling of product of animal origin, and Sarah Bull is going to lead us on this.
Thank you, Chair. Baroness Hayman, you said at the beginning that you want to tighten up on personal imports, but I was coming back from an EU country in April, at the end of April, on the Easter Monday, and there was not a single announcement made, or could I see any signs of the ban that was being introduced, and indeed the tweet that went out on X, which was announcing the ban on all EU products, was subsequently quite quickly deleted, and it doesn't exist anymore. And I'm just really worried because when I then followed up and I asked the Minister a question about what are you doing at ports and airports, all the response I got, which took nearly over 5 days over deadlines, nearly 10 days to answer, was just that the government is engaging with airports, ports and travel operators. But what does that actually mean in practice?
No, we've actually since then done an awful lot of work to try and raise awareness of this, because there's no point banning something if people don't realise that it's banned. Absolutely. So we're working with ports, airports, with Eurotunnel as well. I've recently written a letter about this to raise awareness, but beyond that, we are currently about to start a major communications campaign in order to raise awareness. We are looking to work with Border Force. I've had a meeting with the Home Office Minister to discuss how Border Force can support us by having information at their points as well, because while we don't own the land that an airport's on, Border Force have their own land, so they can actually put signage up there. So we're working very closely right across the board in order to make sure that people actually know what they can and can't do.
When do you think that will come into place? Because obviously time is
Well, some of it's already started, and we're going to be pushing very hard very soon.
I'm just conscious because I think it'd actually be quite an easy step for the airports to take to make an announcement. I mean, I know if you look at the Australian modelling as well, you can't even enter, you've got the checklist you have to, and everyone, it's very clear. And I would have expected on the flight that I got that there was an announcement saying, do check, you can't bring this in. So surely that's something very quick, it doesn't need too much action.
I would hope so.
Okay, it clearly it doesn't seem like we're going to get too many more answers here. But I think if there's anything else, I think that's
all
that's
I can
the
say is
concern.
we are working very closely with all entries to encourage the airports, the Eurotunnel, and the ports to be extremely proactive in promoting the work that we're doing in trying to stop personal imports coming in of those products that we don't want to see.
I'm just concerned, why did the government take down its own tweet about it? Because I then thought, oh, hold on a minute, have they reversed the policy? Because then I couldn't find anything more. So why?
Don't know, I came off Twitter some time ago.
I know, I was going to say, I think, but that's the only source
Well
I've
done,
heard. Well, maybe sensible on Twitter, but I think that would be the big plug that I think.
I mean, I'm very, very happy to keep you up to date with the communications. We were looking only last week at how we can actually do quite a lot more in this area because it is important. So I'm more than happy to keep you up to date.
Does
with
this
the work we're doing
again
on
perhaps
comms.
point to a deficiency within the department? Something's important enough to ban it, but actually then not important enough to put up posters, put out leaflets. And, other people notice this. Farming Today, compulsory listening to anybody who follows the EFRA committee, they broadcast about it on the 26th of April. The British Veterinary Association, the National Farmers Union, the National Farmers Union of Scotland all highlighted concerns around this. And, it's, as Sarah says, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There are other island nations who do it well.
Absolutely. As I say, I'm pushing very hard to substantially increase the communications. And I've been working very closely with a number of different groups in order to be able to do so. So we'll keep you. Hopefully, next time you come in, you will have all that information at your fingertips. I'm actually travelling out of the country next week, so I'll be personally taking a look to see what happens.
You could report back to us. Tell us if you see it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's also important that we look at where we can learn from other countries that are doing this well. In Asia, they are very rigorous in some certain countries.
New Zealand as well.
Yeah, and
no, I am looking.
Yeah, a film is played before your flight lands. So perhaps, I hear the commitment from you as the Minister on this, pushing as hard as you can, but perhaps it's a takeaway for us as a committee as well that we need to ask the airlines. Can you?
If you would like to do that, I would be very grateful.
On the topic of illegal meat imports, obviously a huge issue, and it's something that the committee were able to see firsthand on our visit recently to Dover Port. We know this carries a huge risk, not just to public health, but also our farming community is extremely worried about illegal meat imports coming in. And as we've just heard from the section, it could have a massive impact on our economy if one of these diseases were to get through. I know it's also a source of frustration as well in our farming community that they feel they're doing so much on animal welfare and on food standards when people are able to come in bringing meat in illegally, and to them it doesn't seem like much is happening, and it seems like there's a culture of impunity. And my question to you is, we know this is happening, we know it's happening more. How can we crack down on this, and how can we stop people bringing in illegal meat imports?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is there's been a lot of focus on the fact that illegal meat imports have increased. What I would say is this isn't anything new, but what we have done is we've changed the system of checking. So we do a lot more checks now than we used to, which actually makes me wonder how much was getting through before that we weren't actually picking up. So I think it's partly because we're actually picking up more illegal meat at the border than we used to. We need to send out the message that it is absolutely and utterly against the law to do this. I think some illegal meat comes in because people don't realise, which comes us back to the comms problem. We also need to look very much on the countries where it's coming in from. We have always done rest of world checks, but while we're in the EU, we didn't do checks on EU meat coming in. Now, of course, we're doing that, and we've cracked down on that. The British the Pig Association asked us to ban all imports. We started off by just banning imports that weren't EU standards, which we've now done. So we are trying to listen to the industry to improve things. And I think, again, I'm working very closely with the Home Office Minister. I've been talking to her about Border Force, because obviously it's Border Force that check and pick up the illegal meat imports, to stress the importance role that Border Force is playing here, and that this has to remain a priority, and it mustn't drop down the priority list because of the huge impact to our farmers and the economy if one of these diseases came through.
And I think part of what we picked up when we were there was that perhaps people feel wrongly that they can get off scot-free if they bring in meat illegally. So what new steps can be taken by this government? I know there's been a discussion about crushing cars.
Yes, that's one of the things we're working with Border Force on, because DEFRA can't do that. What we can do, what we've done is we're working, as I say, with Border Force to improve the situation. And one of the things that Border Force can do is impound the vans and then crush them or get rid of them. Because one of the frustrations is that you see the same vans coming back over and over again. So the way to manage that is to actually take the van off them, to try and hurt people at source, if you like. But also we have been looking at whether there's more we can do at source in the countries where you have the illegal meat coming in as well. So it's looking at it in not just what's arriving, but how you can actually work to reduce the amount arriving in the first place.
And does DEFRA have any insights on what the market is for this illegal meat? Where is it going? What's driving that here? And is there work that can be done here at the demand level? Where is it going? And can we do more work there to prevent that flow?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, some of it is people just bringing it in for their personal use, and that's where the communications comes in, that this is no longer allowed. Some of it is clearly just bringing in meat in order to make money out of it. And the way to manage that, as I say, is I think to treat the people bringing it in much more harshly as criminals. I think we've probably not done that enough, which is why we're looking to see if we can do something with the vans. Gareth, do you have any information about where it's going?
Well, just a small point that we are. So the Food Standards Agency have a food crime unit, so we are making that join up as well to try and see if there is intelligence on any sort of, as you say, any demand this side of a border. But as the Minister said, it's a complex mix of all people bringing things over they shouldn't for a variety of reasons, and they probably all need a slightly different set of interventions, and we're trying to capture them all.
Yeah.
I mean, the person we saw whose van had been stopped and was having it examined, I've never seen somebody so relaxed and chilled out about the fact that their van was being examined by Border Force and other officials. I think the more punishments and the more we can...
As I say, we've been working with the Home Office on this, and we'll continue to do so.
It was also noticeable that some of the imports there had come over the EU border in the first place, so which goes to show that it's an international problem as well, and so of course we've been having dialogue with the EU about their own internal controls.
I mean, van catching would be eye-catching. Is it necessarily the best way of intercepting meat?
It's part of a suite of methods to try and, I mean, you've got two things. One, you need to capture it when it comes here, but two, you need to look at how you stop it coming here in such large numbers.
Exactly. So somebody who's importing meat in a van gets found, details are taken presumably, comes back the next week with the same van. Surely intelligence will tell you that's a van to target. If you've crushed his van, I suspect it's not beyond the wit of most smugglers to go and find another van. So while it's very eye-catching, is it necessarily going to be that helpful?
Well, it's about bringing in deterrence, isn't it? And I think you need to look at a number of different ways that you can deter people from doing so.
I mean, some of the vans we saw at Dover Port were not that far from crushing or being crushed in any event, I suspect.
Actually, one of the things that I've noticed when I've been to visit the ports is actually some of the vans are illegal anyway. And so you've got other criminal behaviour going on.
Indeed. Now, look, your evidence about more checks leading to being an effective way of finding more meat products is something I think that we will want to explore in relation to the budget arrangements for Doverport Health Authority. But I'm going to ask Charlie Dewhurst to lead the questioning on that. and other personal import checks.
First, Josh.
Oh, sorry, Josh, yes,
you
said you were...
We'll move on, that's fine.
My apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we talked specifically about Dover. First question in relation to the funding of the Port Health Authority. Why was that funding settlement, why did it come so late in the day and not allow Dover to prepare ahead of the new financial year?
Well, we offered, as you know, Dover a certain funding settlement. When I came in as Minister, there were already discussions going on around that funding settlement. So we were working hard to get an agreement with Dover at that time. Previous to me being the Minister, I don't know what the situation was, but certainly when I came in, I sat down with the team and we looked at how we could get an agreement with Dover, because clearly the work they do in tackling illegal meat entering the country is very important. We then signed off the payment that they've been waiting for, and we've offered them now 3.1 million going forward.
Would you accept that going forward that's not really the best way to operate working with them in partnership, because that money is paying for human resource to stop things at the border, and if they don't have that guarantee of funding in future, then they don't know how many staff they can employ, etc., and what their capability will be?
Well, I mean, I met with Dover. They came in to discuss their concerns and the issues around funding, and clearly we need to get to a situation where we have better communications between us, better understanding between us. One of the things we have tried to do is pin Dover Port Health Authority down on what we actually need to be resourcing as well, because clearly we need to ensure that what we are paying them for is what we need to be focused on picking up the illegal meat, for example. So we've been working through all of that, because and a couple of times we've asked them to kind of refocus the budget.
Yeah. And in terms of the 3.1 million for the coming financial year, that offers them 20% operational coverage. Do you think 20% is sufficient?
Well, I think we would suggest that if the budget was purposed in the way that we're proposing, it would be more than 20%.
Because I think going forward, were there to be, and let's fingers crossed, we do not have an incursion of a major notifiable disease, one would suggest that looking back and having only offered Dover 20% of operational coverage, were that disease incursion to come via that port, I think it would look poorly on authorities at any future public inquiry. Would you accept that?
As I say, I think we are working with Dover Port Health Authority on how to move forward on funding, and we are currently looking at what the focus of that funding should be, because we believe that some of the areas that Dover has proposed comes out of that money are not necessary. For example, veterinary fees.
Right. Would you perhaps be willing to shed some light on why you think that communication broke down between Dover Port Health Authority and DEFRA?
I don't know. It was before I was a minister.
I mean, perhaps
when I came in, the communications had already broken down, and I've done my best to talk to Dover Port Health Authority to try and rebuild some of those relationships.
Yeah, it's going to be, in terms of obviously the importance of Dover, the threat that we know of the illegal meat imports, and the fact that I think, as we've just discussed, these are not often personal imports in the sense that someone's accidentally brought a sausage into the country. These are organised crime operations.
Absolutely, yes.
And I know we're going to come on to some of the wider strategy of smuggling shortly, but I think it is really, really important that we get a grip on this, because I don't feel, and this is not reflection on the situation just that's been created right now, this is a long-running problem, that our biosecurity at Dover and other ports is not sufficient, and that were there to be a major notifiable disease outbreak, I fear there would be serious repercussions afterwards, because I don't think the borders are secure. But thank you.
As I say, we're working very closely with Dover in order to resolve exactly the kind of issues that you're talking about.
Evans wanted to come in, and Josh, but before I bring them in, you said that you thought that if purposed as the department thinks it should be, you could achieve more than 20% examinations, and then you said that you wouldn't include the payment of veterinary inspections from that budget.
Not for meat.
Not for meat.
No.
So you think that there shouldn't be veterinary involvement in meat inspections?
Well,
or somebody else should pay for it?
Well, what we're trying to do is focus on tackling the import of illegal meat, and Dover working with Border Force to pick that illegal meat up. And our assessment is that you don't need a vet to check a piece of meat.
Right. And what's
if it's
your
illegal,
evidence?
it's illegal.
Where's your evidence base for this?
If it's illegal, it's illegal.
Okay. And what then sort of saving would that make? What percentage would we get to?
Off the top of my head, I can't tell you. I can get back to you with those sorts of figures.
Tim?
No, I think you've covered my point.
All right,
Thank you.
Josh?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to touch on the conditions that staff are having to work under in Dover. So when we went to visit, we saw for ourselves how when they're conducting inspections, many of these inspectors, this is Border Force and Port Health Authority, they were working under rusty canopies that had nesting pigeons, that had no walls. In other places where they were able to bring the vans in indoors, there was really limited space. They're not able to wash down anything if they're dealing with a huge biohazard of meat that, as going back to the threats we were talking about, swine fever, for example, they've got no ability to make that biosecure. They had no PPE other than gloves. And then contrast that with Sevington, when we visited the BCP at Sevington, they had temperature-controlled rooms. They were able to properly wash down. They had full PPE. They were clearly well funded to the point where when we walked out they were giving us branded merchandise from the Ashford Port Health Authority, right? But Dover have got, not the basic level of equipment. Do you think that's acceptable given that Dover is essentially the front line of our nation's border?
Well, I'm looking to go down to Dover so I can look at these things for myself. I've been to Sevington, and I'm looking to arrange a visit to Dover, both to go to the AFA site and also to go to the port, because it's important that I'm able to assess these things for myself. I haven't had any complaints of the sort that you are talking about. And I think, having heard what you said, I need to go down and have a look for myself, because it's difficult. Obviously, the ports are private businesses as well. Yeah. So it's important to point that out, I think.
I would just add, Chair, that just a few miles up the road, you've got the Bastion Point BCP, which has obviously been constructed but never actually commissioned, at great cost to the taxpayer, and would enable a far greater number of checks to be done in conditions that are much more appropriate and safe for the staff. And yet that's still sitting there. We're still waiting for a decision on whether that's going to be mothballed again at great expense and handed back to the landlord, or whether it's actually going to be used. Can you shed any light on discussions?
Bastion Point would, if it was being used, would be used for the work they do at Sevington. So I don't quite see
It could be used. So, for example, if somebody was pulled over on suspicion of having a load of illegal meat, they could be directed up to Bastion Point, which would reopen the lanes at Dover. The problem they've got at the moment is they have to shut the lanes at Dover, which reduces their capacity. It means that 20% goes out the window because all of the staff are then working on the vans that are being pulled over. And it obviously holds up traffic coming through as well, which causes massive delays, which has got an economic impact. So Bastion Point would give extra capacity.
The traffic that would go to Bastion Point, if it's open, now goes to Sevington. So I don't quite understand the point that you're trying to make. I'm sorry. Because Sevington is open and working, you have to leave the port to go to Sevington the same way as you would have to leave the port to go to Bastion Point.
But when these vans are being pulled over with illegal meat, for example, and it's not just illegal meat, we saw bootleg alcohol, personal possessions in another van. Yeah. They are being dealt with at Dover, and then they're being asked to make a voluntary surrender. And as we said, they're allowed to go scot-free then. And the staff are working under such horrendous conditions, and it is holding up traffic. So that's the reality on the ground, even with Sevington open. And the Sevington we saw was pretty much empty. So clearly there's something in the system that's not working as intended.
If in that case, what you're talking about is a system issue rather than opening Bastion Point instead of Sevington, because you wouldn't have them both open.
Possibly, but I think if you ask the Port Health Authority in Dover, they would say that it would make a huge difference to their operations if Bastion Point was open, and it has been
Bastion
commissioned
Point would only be
£20
open to do what Sevington is doing.
Well, could it not be open to do what's being done in open lines with the poor facilities that Josh and others have described here.
I don't know. Did you want to come in, Spence? Because you know more about this.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. So I think there's a couple of points that we need to work through and understand. One is, I think you touched upon it, Mr. Newbury, is around the logistics. So how would you get the vehicle from the port to Bastion, which is 5 miles away?
Yeah.
It'd be escorted.
It would have to be some sort of escort.
We'd have to work whether that would be able to happen. And the second then is around how we would fund the facility. Obviously, it would be a different funding arrangement that would be in place for something like Seventon, where we've got legal trade paying through the common user charge. That wouldn't be the case. So it would be how would we fund the provision. But
given the cost of this going wrong, is there a cost-benefit analysis to be done here?
Well, I think there's an assumption here that opening Bastion Point would solve a lot of those issues, but my understanding is Sevington has all the capacity, so it strikes.
Sevington has the capacity for commercial imports. We're talking here about personal imports and the circumstances in which these personal imports are examined.
Okay, so but if you are talking about having Dover Port Health Authority escorting to Bastion Point 5 miles away, and yet you're talking about staff pressures at Dover, I think this would need to be looked at extremely carefully, because you are talking about something that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of expense and cause delays. I think it's not. I don't think it's as simple as it sounds.
Things in life ever are. Your visit to Dover Port, though, I think would be enormously welcome.
I'm very keen to go.
Not just by the committee, but probably by the Dover Port Health Authority itself. I think it's fair to say that the committee was not particularly impressed by the state of relations between DEFRA and the Dover Port Health Authority. I mean, Gareth has the distinction of having accompanied the committee on the visit and was the first DEFRA official to go to Dover Port Health Authority, they said, for, I can't remember how long, but it was quite some time. And I mean, the Dover Port Health Authority has been in correspondence with you about this, the issues around broken freezers and the like. So, look, if we can encourage you to make that visit.
No, I have. It's in the pipeline. We're trying to organise it so that I don't just go to the Port Health Authority, that I also go to the AFA site. Indeed. Which is why it's just taking time logistically to come together. But I have committed to go, and I will be going.
I'm delighted to hear that, because we're dealing with public bodies here.
Yes.
It makes no sense for anyone, let alone for the issue of biosecurity at the borders, for relations to be as poor as they obviously are.
I don't see any benefit in having poor relationships with people that I'm supposed to be working with. So I'm always extremely keen where relationships are broken down to do my best to repair them. So I have every intention of doing a visit there and understanding more.
That's very welcome. Thank you for that. Jenny, you're going to lead the questioning and the strategy for POAO smuggling.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Before I do, I'm actually just carry on a bit of a theme that we've established there. So I represent Suffolk Coastal. Port of Felixstowe is in my constituency. Now, the Port of Felixstowe and the port users have sought to engage with DEFRA for quite a while now, predating April last year. And they've fed back, I believe, to DEFRA that the Port of Felixstowe intercepts goods that wouldn't be allowed elsewhere. And I believe there's been an FOI request into the level of interceptions that they've had. They believe from their data that their interceptions and checks are far higher than the Port of Dover. Now, I understand there hasn't been a response back from DEFRA, and that may be because you can't comment for a number of reasons, and it may be because of the commercial impact this could have. But can you acknowledge the impact that this does have for not just Port of Felixstowe, but for commercial users of Port of Felixstowe when there are inconsistencies in checks at the port?
Between the checks that they're carrying out at Felixstowe compared with the checks they're carrying out at Dover, do you mean?
Yeah, so inconsistencies in national policies being applied locally mean there are likely to be, well, we know anecdotally that there are more checks being carried out at the Port of Felixstowe than elsewhere. That has a huge impact for port users, for the Port of Felixstowe, and yeah, do you acknowledge the challenges that creates for?
There are always challenges, of course. I mean, one thing, of course, is that every port health authority is independent, so it's up to them how they want to manage their business as well. But, I mean, I've had meetings with the different representatives from the port health authorities around the country, because I think it's important for me to understand the different challenges that each port faces. And some are much, Dover is obviously, with the short straits, is very, very busy. Felixstowe will be very busy, others not. The port here in London, I'm due to visit as well. I'm more than happy to discuss the challenges they're facing with them, and if they've got suggestions on how we can support and help, then I'm very happy to do so. I'd be very happy to have a visit there as well, if that's helpful.
They would bite your hand off.
Yeah, no, if they want to get in touch, then I'd be very happy to look at doing that.
Excellent. I think
one of the things I'd just like to say is this is a really complex area of government and of policy. And I have been working extremely hard since I became the Minister, because I'm taking this very seriously, to understand those complexities and the challenges. So I'm always very, very open to talking to people, meeting people, and going on visits so that I can better understand those complexities, because it's not straightforward at all.
I understand that, and I'll move on in a moment. I just want to reiterate a small point, or two small points. It's the inconsistencies in how national policies are implemented that can have a commercial impact on how different ports are able to react, and it can disadvantage some ports over others.
If they'd like to get in touch with the detail and the information, I'd be very happy to have a look at that.
I'll correspond with that.
Yeah.
And I think it's historically, and this predates April last year, the lack of communications between DEFRA from when these checks started to happen with port users and port authorities. Okay. Well, that's brilliant.
That's fine. I'm happy to take that away.
Yeah, thank you. So moving on to strategy and looking at the future and how we manage some of the challenges that we've discussed here, but some wider ones as well. There are so many departments, agencies, authorities involved in it. Who is providing the strategic oversight and leadership to drive forward some of the improvements that are necessary?
Improvements on what? Just the...
So some of the broader issues that we've highlighted in what we touched on today. There's clearly some better workings that are needed. This is a cross issue. Many issues are going from broader aspects of biosecurity. So who is convening and leading on the multi-agency approach?
Well, clearly we have regular meetings with the teams at a ministerial level. It depends what you're talking about. I mean, I meet regularly with the devolved governments, for example, right, because there are issues that face the different devolved governments. We have AFA, who do an enormous amount of work in this area. We have a really good team who work on borders, and so you have the senior civil servants and the ministers and the devolved governments really all working together on this to make sure that we're making the right kind of decisions, because different decisions have different impacts and have to be led by different sections of the department. I don't know if Gareth wants to put any more.
Well, no, I think that's right. I mean, there have been some changes in the way that government organises itself in this space. So, for example, there was, until relatively recently, a team within the Cabinet Office that gave oversight to all borders issues. Because, of course, you're also talking about HMRC presence at the border as well as Border Force and so on. And I think the reality is that in each case, there are different sort of circumstances that we work through. So we've seen, I think, through the operations in Sevington, for example, there's been a fantastic set of benefits from that being a multi-agency site, and that means everyone can pull together and they can work around computer things when they go wrong and all of that sort of thing. That isn't fully replicated in the way that we make policy, but we do try and join up, linked to the new border command that's been set up within the Home Office. There is official-led governance that goes alongside that, and we're making sure that biosecurity is fed into that. So I think we would see ourselves as the sort of strategic brain, if you like, for biosecurity. But the reality is, as the Minister said, it's a complex system, both internationally and domestically, that we then have to work with. So what we try and do is make sure we're taking the right evidence to the right meetings at the right time to have that kind of influence.
We also have a One Health approach now as well, which means that I meet regularly with representatives both from Department of Business and Trade, from Health, and other departments as well, because this needs to be worked cross-department. It's not just around the work that DEFRA is carrying out.
Brilliant, thank you. So Helen Buckingham, Chartered Environment Health Practitioner, told us, the committee, that the national policymakers have, and I quote, an extreme lack of an understanding about enforcement delivery on the front line. So given that and given that insight, what mechanisms do you have to engage with teams on the front line, and how does this inform your own policy making at the moment?
Well, clearly we work with the people who are on the front line from our own teams, from DEFRA, but also, as I said, I recently had a meeting with Seema Malhotra, the Minister in the Home Office, who's responsible for border force, to discuss how we can work better together, having taken feedback from the people who are working on the front line. And clearly it's important to listen to people and look and see how you can improve things. So I meet regularly with her, and I said others from, say, Department of Business and Trade, to see how we can improve things, because you can always improve situations.
You explicitly look at how, when you're having those meetings, is one of the items that you discuss is specifically on improvement and driving collaboration, improvement? Okay.
Yeah, we have done.
Great. So the Border Force have told us themselves that DEFRA is responsible for intelligence on meat smuggling. How do you build into the intelligence picture, and what are the limitations as you see them?
Working with Border Force, you mean?
Yeah. Well, more generally about building the intelligence picture for meat smuggling.
Well, we work with Border Force, but there's other intelligence that goes on. One of the main things, I think, people can get very fixated on digital systems, but actually what's really important is people talk to each other and share information, and we encourage that enormously. Clearly, as far as intelligence sharing goes, I can't say everything because it's intelligence. So, but internally within DEFRA and within the Home Office and other departments, we work very hard to share intelligence together, and also clearly with devolved government and with the EU and further afield, because this is a global issue, as we've already mentioned. I mean, let's just, if you think about the foot and mouth, coming back to that, after the discovery of the case in Germany, Daniel Zeichen, the farming minister, had a meeting with the German minister, and then when we had the further cases in Hungary, I joined him in a meeting with the Hungarian minister. So we do work quite hard to share information and intelligence internationally as well.
Okay, brilliant, thank you.
Right, we're going to move on then to some questions around dealings with inland local authorities. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, as well. Good to see you. Big role for inland local authorities. We know the pressure that local authorities have been operating under financially, etc., etc. They've got a crucial role in terms of public health and biosecurity. What's your assessment of the demand on them at the moment in the process of supporting the work that you're doing, and how are you measuring their performance?
Well, again, there's always a lot of demand on local authorities. Local authorities have been under a lot of pressure in recent years with budget cuts, for example. But I think it's important, again, as I said, with working with the devolved administrations, again, to work at a local authority level, because however you cut it, it's often local authorities who are actually delivering on the ground. And when you come back to intelligence sharing, again, it's very important to hear what local authorities are saying. So DEFRA works closely with the port authorities and the local authorities to ensure that we have proper joined-up thinking in that area.
Can I say, I might turn to intelligence in a moment and sharing with local authorities, but are you seeing any trends in particular with inland seizures?
I'm not aware of particular trends. I don't know if we... No.
So then covering on intelligence, we've talked about the importance of intelligence sharing. I mean, at the moment, local authorities don't have real-time access to IPAFs, do they?
Gareth, do you want to comment, Spencer?
So port health authorities will have...
Yeah, but inland authorities don't at the moment?
No, currently, no.
And is that something that you might look at as a department, potentially?
I mean, it's something we can look at. There's a whole host of things that we've got to look at in terms of the digital roadmap, but there's something we can certainly take away to look at.
I mean, are inland local authorities getting the same access to intelligence that like the port health authorities are getting?
I wouldn't know the answer.
I think it depends what it is.
Yeah. I think the NFU made a point before Christmas. I think the publication of data is really important in this space to build confidence and sort of understanding what's being seized, where, and in what numbers, so that people can sort of build a picture.
We look, I saw that, and we are looking at if we can publish more data in good time. But clearly we need to do an assessment as to what the data is. Some data is very commercially sensitive, for example, so we just have to judge it on its own merits. But I clearly do appreciate that that in certain occasions we could publish more data.
So is an assessment then of what local authorities need in terms of intelligence, is that something you're working on as a department?
Yes.
And then the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health sort of raised a flag with us about the significant shortages of environmental health and trading standards professionals, and I wondered what plans the department had to help local authorities with that, because there seem to be some quite significant shortages.
Yeah, I mean, this has been something that's been the case for some time. For some time. I mean, when I was a county councillor, going back too many years, we had shortages in our in those sorts of areas back then. I think, I mean, ultimately this is for local authorities. We can't tell local authorities what staff to employ and how to manage their departments, but clearly we would be very happy to work with them constructively to see how we can help support them, because it is an important part of the picture. Yeah.
I mean, that might be a rich vein of work to work with the LGA on. It's just that the FSA in its stakeholder, in one of our stakeholder surveys for this inquiry, used quite strong language, I thought, because they said a lack of new entrants in the pipeline and declining options for education and training are threatening the future security of our food system. So, I mean, it is a real issue, and it's been building up for some time, as you say.
Yeah, and I mean, it's quite interesting because we have a skills minister now, and I know that the skills minister is focusing on different areas where we have shortages that could impact on some of the policies that we need to be delivering, some of the actions we need to be taking. So she is specifically looking at things like that.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the implementation of the border target operating mechanism. Josh, you're going to lead us in that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, Baroness Hayman, when you came into office and you looked at the border target operating model, and particularly the sort of design and the way it was being implemented, did you identify any issues with that? And if so, what were they?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to say about the BTOM is that it was being phased in. So the first thing I had to do was to understand the phasing in and why it was being phased in. Clearly, one of the things I think that was challenging was working with different groups that were impacted by the implementation of the BTOM, whether you're talking about logistics, whether you're talking about supermarkets, whether you're talking about producers. So very early on, I had round tables with all the different groups, so I could understand their specific concerns about the way things were being implemented, which could inform us in, as we continue to phase it in, what was going to be most effective and where we needed to perhaps do some further work. Of course, one of the interesting things about that is that some people who thought something was working very well, another group didn't think it was working very well. So there's always a challenge in finding the best way to move forward. But clearly there are some challenges. We have delayed some of the new measures that are coming in. That's in order to ensure that trade is properly ready and prepared. We did have some concerns raised by trade. It does need to work effectively for them. They need to be able to manage the costs of getting ready for new systems. So I think there are some ways where it is clearly working better. We've talked about the increased amount of illegal meat that's being picked up because we're doing more checks. But at the same time, it has to be brought in a way that works well for business and trade.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in particular, a lot of businesses feel that it's quite overbearing and they feel like the amount of time and effort that's required for them to be compliant is very high. But at the same time, they worry that bad actors who are looking to get around the rules can do that quite easily. I think that's the kind of theme we've got.
Yeah. Of course, one of the things about the BTOM is we've tried to do it on an evidence-based, risk-based assessment, so that the products that are highest risk are the ones that get checked the most, which again seems a sensible way to go forward.
Yeah. The team within DEFRA who were responsible for delivering BTOM, we understand, have been disbanded. Now, obviously, you can't keep groups like that going forever and ever, but does that mean that DEFRA considers the implementation of the BTOM to be complete now?
No, what it wouldn't. So what's happened is people have been moved to work into other areas that also involved with borders and trade. So it's not as if it's just disappeared. It's just that as the bulk of it has now been brought into place, staff are better resourced and focused in other areas that is still supporting what we're doing, but not just as a separate team.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. So you touched on some aspects. The implementation's been delayed because trade want to be ready and you want to make sure that it has its full effect.
Yes.
The National Audit Office and some traders have stressed the importance of the single trade window to realise the benefits of BTOM. Is that one of the measures that you've paused because you don't think that industry is fully ready? And do you know when that's going to be brought forward?
No, we've paused it. Of course, it is something that industry have discussed with us, but we took the decision to pause it because we want to make sure that it's working effectively and in the best way. And we're currently assessing that. So I can't really say any more than that. I mean, it's paused and we're assessing it but we do work very closely with industry to ensure that what we are going to be doing is going to be fit for purpose.
Okay. And have you made an assessment of the risks of not implementing that?
Of course, a risk assessment takes it all into account. Okay. Of course.
Just very briefly, lastly, just to follow on from what Jenny was saying about the sort of differing levels of checks at different ports. Yeah. Have you made an assessment of the risk that might be posed by delaying the implementation of controls at West Coast ports?
We're working very closely with the devolved governments on the West Coast ports. When I came in, I wanted to find a solution to that. Again, it's actually quite complicated because of the situation with Northern Ireland. So I've been meeting regularly with the Minister from the Welsh Government, the Scottish Government, and also I go regularly now to Belfast as well to meet with the Minister there. We had a specific away day to look at what is going to be the most effective way of managing this, because again you want to bring in the right level of checks for business and trade, while at the same time protecting the biosecurity risk from the West Coast. And we have a meeting with the devolved governments this month where we are hopefully going to make a final decision on that. There have been various suggestions put forward, which we've been getting the final assessments done on.
Okay, thanks for your responses. Appreciate it. I'll hand back.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we're moving on to BTOM data and monitoring. Charlie, you're going to lead us on that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. The FSA report into the BTOM in March stated, I quote, "The number of checks completed and issues identified under the BTOM cannot be accurately reported due to limitations in data availability and quality." So conversely to that, we've had answers to parliamentary questions, and the Minister himself has stated that data has not been released for operational security reasons, i.e. not letting potential smugglers know what's going on. So does DEFRA know the number of checks that have taken place on the BTOM, or is DEFRA keeping that information to itself for security reasons?
Well, clearly we do keep a certain amount of data. It depends on are you talking about every single check?
Yes, I'm talking about data related to the BTOM, the monitoring of the BTOM.
All the checks.
Yeah.
I don't have the details in here in front of me. I don't know if you've got it with you.
Yeah, sure, Minister. So in APHA, they regularly receive data from the system. And that's across plants and products of animal origin. And that data includes things such as data on number of notifications, number of documentary checks, number of physical checks. And obviously, Seventon being a government-run facility, we would also have that data for the facility in Kent.
So you'd refute the FSA's claim that there is gaps in the data?
So no, I'm certainly not saying that at all. I think the couple of things on data. I'd say obviously it's a relatively new system, very complex systems. The Minister's highlighted with a number of digital systems, with a number of different data sets. And I think there is work that needs to be done in terms of data quality. And that's a real focus, a priority for us. And I think if I can just touch on 4 areas that I think we need to focus on. One is around user capability, so making sure that the data is the right data that's put on the system, both by trade and also through Port Health. But also then looking at how we improve our systems, such as iPaths, to ensure that we're capturing the right level of data. And we've got a whole host of continuous improvement planned on our roadmap to do that. And then there's some bigger sort of technical innovations that we're looking at, which is how do we link the systems up, particularly between local and central, so that we can improve the data flow, which again is looking to improve that data situation that we face at the moment.
And it's also worth pointing out, I fairly recently had a meeting with the FSA to discuss these issues as well and to look at how we can move forward.
And just, so is it DEFRA's intention, therefore, in future, once you've ironed out these issues around data, to produce public performance data, so not going to risk any sort of security issues in relation to checks, but to give us and the public confidence that the BTOM is working and that the risk-based percentages are being delivered?
Well, as I said before, we will happily look at what data we can publish going forward once we are confident that we're not going to be breaking any commercial confidentialities or any or causing any issues for anything. But absolutely, have to look at that.
Okay, thank you. Could we move back to Tim for questions on trade and fresh produce?
Well, it leads very well on from those questions, Chair, which is around trade and fresh produce. And I wonder whether you could just confirm what the situation is with the easement of import checks on medium risk fruit and vegetables, which expires on the 1st of July, because the sector and trade sort of told us they didn't feel they had clarity on this issue.
Yes, we paused it coming in. I think, was it right, due to come in January, and then we paused it until July on those imports. Yes, I mean we paused it because of concerns about industry not being ready for the new checks. So we are expecting, as I said, for them to come in July now, and we're continuing to work with industry to ensure that they are ready to be compliant with the new checks when they.
So we are going ahead in July,
Minister? At the moment, that is what our intentions are.
Because we had very strong representations from the Fresh Produce Consortium and others that said that they didn't feel that they had enough notice to prepare for the new checks, and they were concerned that a lot of the trade, particularly European trade, is between small businesses that haven't been involved in border processes before. So they're quite worried that not only is there not enough notice, that the people involved aren't prepared.
This is why we delayed it 6 months.
Okay. So is your view that business and trade is ready for the implementation of these checks?
We are continuing to work with them to answer any questions, because obviously it's important that when we bring in new rules that business and trade are going to be compliant.
Okay. There's obviously been a lot of talk of a self-regulation model in this area as well. Is this something that potentially the department might consider, an alternative approach for fresh produce, such as an authorised operator status and the use of control points?
I think we need to look at why we're bringing in the different kinds of controls we are. What we're doing at the moment is looking at medium risk, not low risk. And low risk, we can look at different ways of managing imports. But we felt it was important that we should increase checks for medium risk, which is why we're looking to bring it in July.
Okay. Might I think, in fact, for most fruit and vegetables, we've taken them out of regulation altogether, because on a risk basis, so there's been a lot of deregulation in that area. As you say, there's then the medium that breaks into two categories, but that's what's been subject to an easement. But there are biosecurity risks in relation to that trade, and it is important.
How much trade is affected come the 1st of July? Do you know? I mean, we've got an overall figure of 3.5 million tonnes of fresh produce from Europe, but I presume most of that falls into the low-risk category, like you say. So I'm just wondering what...
The main commodities covered, I'm not going to get this exactly right, but it's tomatoes, peppers, aubergines, cucumbers, I think. So ones we import a lot of, but a small number of commodities. I think the plan will be that, so it's under active consideration exactly, I think, how we set out the implementation. But as you've seen throughout the BTOM implementation, there's a balance to be struck between introducing it and how you operate that in practice to keep the trade flowing. And the challenge we've had, and actually I remember a few years ago, the EU updated its system. It had the opposite problem to us, which was it had a system in place and it was updating it, and it kept postponing the new system because it could do that because it had a system. In this case, until we switch something on, we haven't got anything. So we always run this risk that you switch it on and something happens. So, but we don't have the luxury of just not switching it on yet, because that just prolongs a gap. So in everything we've done, I think, through the BTOM, and I'm not very close to the implementation, that's why Spencer's answered all those questions so well, but there is something around turning it on, preparing people, trying to get a landing zone, but then being very proportionate and pragmatic in the way that the immediate implementation steps are taken, so that you can get to a level of compliance, but also confidence from traders using the system in a pain-free way.
Yes, I do agree with the confidence point. Is trade right, though, when they've told us the border control posts are already at capacity and that they're worried about BCPs meeting the additional demand that will now be created post-July? So
I don't know. I'm not close enough to know exactly how that's sort of been modelled, but what I know is that the work is underway to all of the steps that are due to come in are ones that can be effectively resourced within the system.
Yeah, we've worked quite a lot on resourcing, because obviously you need things to be properly resourced if it's going to be effective.
I mean, can I suggest that there's more work to be done with the sector? Because as we heard on the 25th of March, which isn't that long ago, being here on the 6th of May, is that they didn't feel confidence in knowing what they had to do and as to what will happen and when. So I think that's something the department could look at quite urgently with this deadline approaching us.
Yeah, I just really wanted to make a push on that, because it's actually very unnerving, I think, that 8 weeks out, we don't know for definite. Everything has said, well, we believe you either have to make a decision now or postpone it again. But you've had long enough, you've postponed it since January, now it's July, it's fast approaching. So when's the definitive answer going to be made? Because they need certainty.
Well, we did in January, we said we were postponing it until July, so they should be working on the basis that it is happening in July.
They said they've had no communication, and July is only 8 weeks away. So is it yes, you're going to postpone it again or not? Because I think it is fair to say you should know, and they deserve to have that certainty.
Well,
there is a need for a collective agreement on that decision across government of some kind, because because of wider circumstances. So there are other interests outside DEFRA, and those are being actively worked through. But the legal position is that the easement hasn't been extended and will end.
We've had a hint at European negotiations. Is that what wider circumstances means?
So all of the arrangements that we're talking about are about EU trade. So of course, they're relevant to discussions around EU-UK.
Then that means that you've got the EU meetings on the 19th of May, then there'll be further discussion. So what's happening?
I'm not trying to say it's all tied up in that way, but we are actively working through, and that's the reason why DEFRA hasn't come out to say this is what's happening.
What's the feeling amongst the other departments then? Because you must have a feel or a steer at this moment in time, if you think it's likely or not. I know you may not want to commit outright, but you must have a...
Can you say it again?
Well, the indication was the other departments of... Obviously, it's cross-party, so I'm saying, what's the other departments sort of the feeling at the moment? Do you think... Are they happy that they're ready and those are starting on the 1st of July?
Well, so we are... I mean, at the moment, we are discussing it with the other departments. Beyond that, I'm unable to provide any more information because we're actually waiting to hear back.
I think again, it's you're cutting a bit too close and too fine to time for this. I don't think we can keep saying that as an excuse of having other discussions. I think the market needs to know.
I mean, the sectors are saying they need this information and this certainty. Surely it's not acceptable that should be held up until the internal agreements within and between government departments is settled for something of this consequence.
I'll take these concerns back and see what we can do to get in touch with the sector sooner rather than later, because I do appreciate that July is coming up fast. That's fine.
Presumably, you factored all these considerations in when you made a 6-month delay in January.
Yeah.
So is there? I mean, nothing has changed to affect that timetable.
Not at the moment.
No. And what might come on the 19th of May. Okay. Anybody else coming in on this? I think we've probably taken as much from it as we can at the moment. Can I take you to some of the commercial trade burdens that we've heard evidence about? And it does kind of move on rather naturally from what we've just been talking about. Nigel Jenny, I think it was, from the Fresh Produce Consortium, it said, and it was certainly one of the witnesses, everybody is desperate to avoid using Sevington because of its costs, delays and inefficiency. Do you recognise that? And what are you doing to improve it for you, if that's the case?
That isn't the impression that I've been given by a lot of people I've been speaking to.
Well, I mean, he was... Nigel Jenny did tell us of Sevington. It may well be that it's covering its costs, but it's just not competitive. He said there is huge inefficiency at Sevington, and that an importer paying, and we quote, about a common user charge fee of around £14,500 for a 3% inspection level could receive exactly the same service for £500 or less from a commercial control point. You can see why they would need some assurance that their fees are being used effectively.
Yeah, as I say, I mean, the common user charge is set to recover costs, because clearly we have to recover costs, and we review it to look at whether or not the costs are being covered and whether or not that needs to be adjusted. But certainly the information I'm getting back from the work carried out at Sevington and the efficiency is not matching that assessment.
I mean, this comes to a point about stakeholder engagement and the ability of organisations to make their voices heard and to be listened to.
Yes.
Within DEFRA. And I have to say, we've had some fairly worrying evidence in relation to that, in relation to finding implementation for solutions for BTOM issues. Both the HTA and the FPC said that at the BTOM design phase, their solutions were, we quote, outright rejected and are continually ignored. The FPC also said that the common user charge consultation was on a fundamentally different subject from how the fees are actually applied. So, you know, this again paints a picture of a department which isn't really focused on the outcomes for the people that are required to use it. Does that concern you?
If you're talking about the design of the BTOM, that was some time ago.
Okay.
And as I said, I have
You've inherited the same officials.
Yes, but as I've said, I have met. One of the first things I did was have round tables with the different groups who use the BTOM and some of whom use Sevington, to discuss with them how they felt it had been brought in and how the implementation was going, to listen to different concerns, in order to start looking at what we could do to improve things. You can't make everybody happy, because some people wanted something to happen and the other group wanted exactly the opposite. So we have to work out what we think is the best way to move forward, while on the basis that we need to have biosecurity right at the forefront of what we're doing with the BTOM, but at the same time not putting too great a burden on trade. And that balance can be quite difficult, which is why has been important for me to talk to people and listen to people. But as I say, you're never going to please everybody.
well, I mean, here's something that probably could please everyone. We got evidence
Please give me
from
something that can
Logistics
please everyone.
UK. We said we've been asking for a single liaison contact for industry, where you put in your query, it's fielded to the appropriate authority, and you get a comprehensive and timely response back about what consignment has been held, why it's been held, and when you can expect it to be released. That doesn't sound like rocket science.
That's for a single contact. Do we have a single contact, Gareth? And of course, also you've got border force as well, so it's slightly complex. I don't know if anyone can help with that.
So we would have a single contact for Sevington, but for the other commercial ports, then that's
of course they are commercial ports.
So I think there's a couple of things. So one of course is with the restructure that was referenced earlier. Some of these resources have now moved into the Animal Plant Health Agency, and they have their wider system of. They have a Centre for International Trade, and that's one of the advantages of doing that, is that we ought to be able to draw on those systems. Then I know from my own visits to Sevington, the question about where there has been a consignment held, maybe something's gone for a diagnostic test, people were losing sight of where was that test, it's gone off to Ferrer, which is up in Sandhutton, and how long was it going to be, and what was the driver meant to do. And I think there were some specific actions taken by the team at Sevington. One of the things that I was worried about was the particular amount of trade in young plants, tomatoes and peppers in particular, that comes through Sevington, or would come through Sevington now, in Christmas, so around December, January, February. And I was at Sevington with members of the HTA and the NFU and others, and we had a really constructive, well, first of all, they were quite impressed by the surroundings, but then they were very keen to understand how those would play out in practice. And it was absolutely great to see, in particular, the plant inspectors leaning into that set of challenges from the industry. And we had some really fantastic feedback, actually, from the responsiveness of the APHA staff to making sure that trade flowed. I was getting quite a lot of lobbying from contacts in the NFU and elsewhere, all of which dried up in practice. Not so many letters of thank you afterwards to the teams, though some, but certainly lots of concerns that I think were put to bed through that assiduous focus that the people on the ground give. And so, that's not unusual. That's how they've been operating, in particular for rest of world trade, for a while. So I think part of what's going on is a concern because the change is so enormous for people. It's all happened quite quickly, and these are new systems, and they are bedding in, and that gives its rise to its own problems. But I think in practice, there's a lot of investment to try and work through those, and that's a good example, I think, of where a concern didn't come to pass. And then separately, of course, there's the policy about control points, which has been put in specifically so that businesses can, if it works better for their model, work through control points. But I know that the process then of designating those control points is quite complicated, quite drawn out, and has taken time. But what should happen over time is that you get more businesses able to make use of all of these things. These are designs within the system. They're not accidental quirks, but they are naturally taking time to work through.
Well, that leads on very nicely, actually, to my next question, because Horticultural Trade Association said that BCPs really aren't suitable for plant inspections, and we've heard lots of stories of trees and other plants being damaged at the point of inspection. And then, as you say, they're looking for expanded use of control points and place of destination checks. What consideration have you given to that?
Well, clearly, we've improved some of the checks for plants. So, for example, we've increased the height of some of the checking areas in order that taller trees won't get damaged. You know, just simple things like that can help support the way that the checks are done. And I think it's important to work with industry to see if there's any practical things that we can do. But I think, I don't know, people don't quite appreciate the enormous number of plant diseases that are out there. I mean, some of which could cost our economy enormous amounts of money.
I'm pretty sure the HTA appreciates that. Though.
Yes, but I'm just thinking, more broadly in the general public, which is why it's really important that we do the checks and we do them effectively. Now, we're very happy to work with industry to look and see if there's ways that we can make those checks. We don't want to be damaging anybody's stock, for example, which is why we've increased the height for trees to be inspected. But at the same time, we don't want things coming into this country that shouldn't be here. So it's getting that balance right.
Right.
Yeah.
But again, it's not all just about broken trees and damaged plants, though. The Sally Cullimore of the Horticultural Trade Association told us, previous to BCP operations, there was a lot of direct contact between businesses and inspectors, and a lot of exchange of information, as you'd think it ought to be. We have lost that connection now. Inspections are happening at the BCP behind closed doors. So, given the cost that they're paying and the service that they're getting, we're seeing a familiar pattern emerging here, is it not? A poor relationship and communication between the department and the people that we're there to serve.
Well, I'm not aware of how inspections were done previously, and I wasn't aware that all inspections were necessarily done behind closed doors. And that there was concerns about that. I mean, again, on the basis that I am trying to improve communications and relationships that have broken down previously, I'm very happy to look at how we can work with the team to improve that, because inspections have to happen, but they need to be happening in the most effective way possibly, and that needs to be working with industry as well.
Mm-hmm. Moving on from that, the authorised operator pilot that you've been running, where are you in the evaluation of that, and when might we see the scheme being rolled out?
Well, so it was always intended to be a pilot, as you pointed out. It's currently what we're doing is evaluating how it worked, and part of that evaluation is looking at the benefits to trade and also value for money. I can't give you a date when we will have finished doing that evaluation, but it's currently taking place.
Okay. Anyone get anything else on this, or shall we move on then to issues around animal welfare labelling? Josh, you were going to lead us on this.
Yes, and thank you, Baroness, for allowing us to sort of sneak this in at the end of the session. So the previous government consulted on fairer food labelling, and the consultation ended a whole year ago tomorrow. Yeah. What's the government's current position on introducing animal welfare labelling?
We have had a meeting fairly recently. I'm doing this alongside the Farming Minister, Daniel Zeichner. And we have had a roundtable both with industry and also with animal welfare organisations to look at options for implementing labelling. It's actually quite a complicated area because there's an awful lot that you could do, and if you're not careful, you're going to end up with every packet being the size of a newspaper just to fit all the labelling on. So it's important that what we do is effective, but also really, really clear for consumers. I think that's a critical point. One thing that's worked really, really well recently is the labelling on eggs. That's been very effective. And because it's been very easy for consumers to see exactly what they're buying, it's actually changed purchasing behaviour to the advantage of animal welfare. So any decisions we make about any further labelling has to have that same impact. So we are actively looking at that at the moment, and with a view to looking to see what would be the most effective way to introduce something going forward.
Okay. So the consultation, I think, proposed a 5-tier labelling system, and that would initially just be for pork, chicken and eggs. And that would obviously differentiate between products that fall below, meet or exceed the baseline animal welfare regulations for the UK, so that consumers can make an informed choice and they can see the goods that have been imported from abroad and perhaps aren't held to the same standards that goods produced in the UK are. Do you think... I mean, I know that you have to make sure that it isn't, as you said, overly complicated, but they have a similar system in Germany and it's worked pretty well.
No, we're looking at it.
Yeah, okay.
We're looking at it. And also, Waitrose are doing something interesting at the moment as well with their kind of colour coding and everything. So we are looking at different kinds of labelling that we think has been effective in order to see what's going to work best. Okay.
But obviously it's not just about animal welfare concerns, it's also about making sure that our farmers who are held to a higher standard than imported goods are getting recognised for meeting those standards. Yep. So do you think that this would go a long way to making sure that farmers are paid a fair price and that consumers can see on the packet the value of that high quality food that our farmers are producing?
I think it's important that consumers know very, very clearly exactly what it is they're buying. And I don't think actually it's just about new labelling, it's also about existing labelling. Because one of the things we're also considering is whether or not existing labelling is actually giving a clear picture to the consumers. Because some food that may be labelled as being British has only been packaged here, for example. So again, it's about ensuring that any labelling that comes in is not just clear, but it's actually properly accurate and gives a fair picture to a consumer who wants to know exactly what it is they're buying. But you're absolutely right. It's really important that our farmers are properly protected when looking at imports that may have been produced to lower standards. So clearly labelling can be an effective part of that, as we've seen with eggs.
Okay, encouraging to hear, but given that the consultation ended a year ago, what's kind of been the delay to getting to this point? And
I would suggest a general election.
Yes, but that was like 9 months
yes,
ago
but
now.
Yes, but when you get into government, one of the things I asked for in my department was a list of all the things that the previous government had started within my portfolio that I'm to look at what we needed to continue to work on, and it was an extremely long list.
Yes.
So I'm not trying to make excuses in any way. All I'm saying is that we are actively working on this, and we've held some roundtables to discuss it with industry, and we're going to be doing some follow-ups as well.
Okay, really appreciate that. But do you have any indication on timescales for when?
I can't give you any timescales, but okay. I'm personally very interested in it.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Charlie, you wanted to go in?
Yeah, thank you. This current consultation followed one that was almost a year before that was sort of rejected under Mark Spencer when he was Farmer Minister. I worked on some of the industry roundtables on that. It was a very, very rare subject that managed to unite the entire supply chain, food supply chain, from farmer to retailer, because farmers rightly pointed out that it's not necessarily true that a production system equals a welfare outcome. The processors, as I'm sure you've heard, have concerns about complexity and the potential added cost to the food through this welfare labelling. And the retailers think it's confusing because actually consumers are not necessarily demanding this. I think the egg one's an interesting example because retailers follow consumers actually rather than telling consumers what to do. And it was something that consumers felt particularly strongly about. So would it not be better in this instance to look at the issue that, as Josh just raised, around that country of origin issue that continues to come up and actually allow the retailers to work with their supply chain to come up with their own labelling system in relation to production systems should they choose to do that?
As I say, we are actively looking at all the different options at the moment. I'm aware of the concerns you've raised. When we have met with both industry and animal welfare organisations, they both acknowledge that the labelling of eggs has actually worked very effectively, and that there's also other options that are being looked at by other supermarkets. I said, like Waitrose have their particular labelling option. But I think the main thing for me is to, one, give proper information to consumers, because we all want to know what it is that we're purchasing, but also to make sure that farmers have that protection for animal welfare, because it's a really important part of what our farmers do, and that doesn't happen in every country. So, as I say, we are looking at it right across the board.
Okay, thank you very much. Helena, you wanted a few questions?
Thank you, Chair. And aware this has been a fairly long questioning session, so I'll keep this brief. I just wanted to touch on animal welfare more broadly, falling within your ministerial portfolio. Obviously, we all have many constituents who care deeply about animal welfare. Yep. We're a nation of animal lovers, and the government made a number of very strong commitments in the run-up to the election. Yep. On ending puppy smuggling, banning trail hunting, and also working with industry and others to work towards the phasing out of animal testing. I just wondered if you could give the committee an update on the work on animal welfare.
Okay, so first of all, on puppy smuggling, we're supporting Dr. Danny Chambers' bill, which we hope will go through. So fingers crossed that we support that, and it'll also help with things like ear cropping, of course, which we've also committed to doing. On the manifesto commitments around banning trophy imports and trail hunting, tightening up the Hunting Act. Both of those are in my portfolio, and I am currently working with officials on how best to bring in legislation to deliver on those two manifesto commitments. More broadly on the animal testing, there's myself, David Hanson from the Home Office and Patrick Vallance from DCIT, who are working together to deliver the manifesto commitment on phasing out animal testing. We are currently producing a report, which I think should be released fairly soon, on the steps that we intend to take to do that, and that will be then for consultation for people to input into. More broadly on animal welfare, we are developing an animal welfare strategy which has 4 pillars coming down from it: companion animals, non-companion animals, companion animals, non-companion animals, international and farmed animals. And we've done an enormous amount of work with stakeholders on developing those pillars with a view to have an animal welfare strategy published later this year. We are also looking at other options for supporting other specific areas there where we have said that we were going to take action. Snares, for example. The legislative timetable is tight, but we are very keen to look at how we can improve animal welfare through different mechanisms, and including looking at how different organisations can support and help, because you don't necessarily need animal welfare legislation to do everything. So it's also looking about what can we do without legislation in order to improve animal welfare outcomes.
Thank you. And on a similar but related topic around, there's been a lot of discussion recently, we touched on it earlier in the discussion about various trade deal conversations ongoing. Yeah. The government has said previously that chlorinated chicken and hormone-treated beef are no-go areas. Yep. Are you happy to confirm that to the committee?
As far as I am aware, they are our red lines and are no-go areas, and I have met with the Trade Minister.
On which point I think that's a very helpful note to end. Minister, thank you very much indeed for your engagement. We're particularly pleased, if I can perhaps just reassert this, about the news that you will be going to Doverport. I think that's something which is of enormous importance. I'm sure the EPHA will be keen to ensure they don't become a block to that. So it would be in everyone's interest, because, as I said right at the outset, this is an enormously important part of government business for so many different reasons. Everything from the mental health of farmers right the way through to the confidence and integrity that we have of the food that lands on our supermarket shelves, quite apart from the cost implications for the public purse. So we thank you for your efforts, we thank you for your attendance here, for the candour of your answers, and we shall no doubt be in contact with you again further. But for the purposes of the day, we have concluded the session, so I end the session. Order.